Applejack's family tree makes absolutely zero sense. Hi, I hope you're having a good day. My name is Lovebird, and man, I love My Little Pony, as many people on YouTube do. I've been enjoying watching a lot of pony videos lately, any I can get my hands on, especially theory videos. But I didn't think I'd be able to make any MLP videos myself. I figured with a fandom this massive, surely every idea has already been thought of, every theory already stated, every episode and movie and special already reviewed. Surely there wouldn't be anything left for me to talk about, right? Well, the other day, out of complete curiosity, I looked up on Google Images Applejack's family tree. As you do. Surely, with so many dedicated fans, someone has already figured out a way to make sense of all her tons and tons of cousins and aunts and uncles we see throughout the show and how they're all related, right? Well, no. Not that I could find anyway. All the family trees I could find were either fan made, like giving Applejack and Appleboom random spouses and fan made children, or very basic, just showing the core family that we already all know and love. Granny Smith, the mother of Bright Mac, who married Pearbutter, who had 3 children, Big Mac, Applejack, and Applebloom. Sugar Belle, who married Big Mac, of course, and their son and Applejack's nephew, Big Sugar. Anyway, this actually came as a pleasant surprise to me, as I now realized that I must take it upon myself to solve the MLP mystery of what is Applejack's true family tree? Like I said, Applejack's family tree doesn't make any sense because, well, she has many aunts and uncles. An aunt or uncle is the brother or sister of your mom or dad. We know that none of these aunts and uncles can be the siblings of Applejack's mom, Pearbutter, because this is specifically an apple family tree. Pearbutter was born as a part of the pear family and married into the apple family. Applejack and her siblings didn't even know they were half pear until the episode The Perfect Pear, all the way in season 7, nor did they even know their maternal grandfather, Grandpear, until they met him in that very episode. So, obviously, they aren't aware of any of their pear relatives or their mom's side of the family tree at all. This means that all of these mysterious aunts and uncles must be on their father's side, meaning, logically, they would be the siblings of their dad, Brightmac. Unfortunately, this also makes zero sense. In flashbacks from the episode The Perfect Pair, it is implied that Brightmac was an only child. His mother, Granny Smith, didn't appear to have any other children in the entirety of that flashback. This leaves us with only 2 possible explanations for all of these aunts and uncles. Either 1, Granny Smith just had like a ton of kids off screen that are just flat out never explained or showed. Or 2, maybe they're not actually Applejack's aunts and uncles after all. Maybe they are just distant relatives that she considers and calls her aunts and uncles. This would make a lot more sense, considering that the Apple family is pretty tight-knit with each other. We can assume that these ponies are all related to Granny Smith in some way, but that doesn't necessarily mean they are all her own children. And yes, I know this is just a cartoon, and we're not meant to think this deeply about Applejack's random background pony relatives, but this is for fun. Oh, and for the sake of simplicity, and because I don't really care for the toys, I'm not going to include any toy or comic or book specific characters in this video, only the ones shown in the show, with minor exceptions. So sorry if you were dying to find out how some random Apple-themed MLP toy was related to Applejack, but I don't know about. But with all that out of the way, I will now, to the best of my ability, explain how each and every single Apple family member are related to each other, as I attempt to create the ultimate Applejack family tree. Now, before I show you the ultimate family tree that I created, I must explain how I went about creating it. To embark on this seemingly impossible journey, I used three main sources. One, what is straight up told to us as facts in the show, as many characters will be randomly mentioned throughout the show by Applejack as my aunt this or my cousin that sort of thing. Two, if there aren't any canon facts about a character, then I attempted to piece things together by looking for clues in the background appearances. Mostly, if two particular ponies tend to stand next to each other a lot, then I assume there is some kind of close connection between them, whether they are siblings or in a romantic relationship or something like that. I know background ponies is not a very reliable source of information, and a lot of decisions between what ponies go where are purely for animation purposes, but unfortunately, that's the only information we really have available as to how some of these ponies are related. And three, if neither of those work out, then I figured out their placement in the tree based on color scheme and who looks most similar to who, reasonably enough. These are the episodes that I focused on the most when conducting this research. My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic Part 1, Over a Barrel, Apple Family Reunion, Family Appreciation Day, and The Perfect Pair. In My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic Part 1, which is the very first episode of the show, when Applejack meets Twilight Sparkle for the first time, she introduces her to a bunch of her family members. This scene is super useful, as it tells us definitively, without a doubt, what some of these ponies' names are and what they look like. In the episode Over a Barrel, Applejack and her friends go to visit her relatives in Appaloosa. These relatives are settler ponies who supposedly created the town of Appaloosa. This would make you think that all of the ponies living there are related to Applejack in some way, but upon further inspection, we can clearly see that this isn't the case. Many of the background ponies in Appaloosa appear in other locations throughout Equestria, especially Ponyville, and are definitely not related to Applejack, such as this blonde Lyra wearing a bonnet. And the show is a little unclear about exactly how many of these ponies living in Appaloosa are related to Applejack. Applejack simply states that they're bringing this tree to her relatives there, but that doesn't mean that every single pony there is her relative. But we do recognize some of her relatives there, such as Apple Fritter, Apple Bumpkin, Peachy Sweet, and Perfect Pie. This is an example of what I meant earlier when I said background appearances could help us when making this family tree. In this case, it may be safe to assume that since these ponies founded and live in Appaloosa alongside Brayburn, that perhaps they are closely related to Brayburn somehow. And yes, I know Appaloosa shows up in a bunch of other episodes after this one, but it'd be crazy to comb through every single scene of background ponies in all of these episodes to see which Apple family members appear and which don't. Besides, even if there are new family members in Appaloosa in later episodes, it's possible they could have moved there later or just be visiting. But the ones who got there first and founded the town are much more likely to be closer related to Brayburn than the ones who came later. Then we come to Apple Family Reunion, and oh boy, do we get a lot of information in this episode, as there are many completely brand new Apple family members introduced, and even flashbacks that tell us a lot about Granny Smith's relatives. In the same way that the ponies in Appaloosa are more likely to be closer related to each other, There are many clues throughout the Apple family reunion that we can use to see who's closer to who. One of them is when all of the families are first arriving for the family reunion, which is being hosted at Sweet Apple Acres. It makes sense to assume that whoever is traveling together are probably closer related to each other. Arriving together is Brayburn, apple strudel, apple cobbler, and half-baked apple. Then apple split, red gala, candy apples, and perfect pie. Then red delicious, golden delicious, apple leaves, apple bumpkin, peachy sweet, and apple dumpling. Although, despite this, I don't think apple dumpling and apple leaves are super close, because apple dumpling didn't even know exactly how many kids apple leaves had until she asks her later on in the episode, in a conversation that feels like they haven't seen each other in a long time and are catching up. And lastly, there's apple cinnamon, Wensley, and Gala Appleby. We can also tell who isn't closely related. This is because, after arriving to Sweet Apple Acres, many of the family members meet up and talk to each other as if they haven't seen each other in a really long time, and therefore are probably more distantly related. Those who are distantly related are Golden Delicious and Apple Honey, and Red Delicious and Hayseed Turnip Truck. This isn't even taking into account all of the many, many little kids that appear at the Apple family reunion. Probably Applejack's cousins, or maybe even second cousins. We can continue our speculation about whose kids they are based on who they look like. Of the kids, there is this pink filly with a green mane, an orangey yellow filly with green mane and magenta eyes, a red filly with green mane and orangey eyes. These three fillies all come out of a carriage at the same time when they arrive to the reunion, so they're probably siblings. Apple Rose also came out with them. Maybe they're her granddaughters, or she's their great aunt or something. The pink filly plays with a yellow filly with a blue mane, so she must be her cousin she hasn't seen in a while, as opposed to her sister who she would see all the time. And lastly, standing next to Applesauce is a mint green filly with a blonde mane. One of the most important clues we get from this episode is the family photos from past reunions that Granny Smith shows her granddaughters from her scrapbook. At every reunion, the family members take a group photo in front of the barn. In one of these past photographs, we see Bushel, Brayburn, Apple Split, Apple Rose, Applesauce, Apple Strudel, Half-Baked Apple, Candy Apples, and some random yellow baby with a green mane. Now, the sad part is there is no filly in the present day reunion that has this color scheme, and that's where I have a dark theory that maybe this baby died. But anyways, there's also a song in this episode. Racist Barn. I mean, raise this barn. There are also some background ponies that appear only during the song, even though some of them aren't even Apple family related. I think I'll just chalk that up to the animators just threw some background ponies in there and just ignore the song, which has been stuck in my head for weeks now, thanks to making this video. Joy. Moving on to the episode Family Appreciation Day, the main takeaway from this episode is Granny Smith's flashback to how her and her family settled down in Ponyville, before it was even officially founded as Ponyville. In this flashback, we see a young Granny Smith traveling with two younger stallions, an older stallion she definitively calls her pa, and a mare who we can also very safely assume is her mother. How? Because of this scene where Granny Smith's father gives Princess Celestia a kiss on the hoof, only for this mare to glare in jealousy, meaning she is totally his wife, and so totally Granny Smith's mom. And the two stallions, I think, are Granny Smith's brothers. I was very excited to learn all of these fascinating facts about Granny Smith's family, but there is one thing about this episode that unfortunately gives us some problems. As Granny Smith tells this flashback story to Apple Bloom and her classmates, she refers to her parents and siblings as the Smith family. This would imply that she may have actually married into the Apple family, which causes a lot of confusion on account of the fact that we literally know nothing about Granny Smith's husband. For all we know, she might not have even ever had one, and Bright Mac's father could be literally any stallion on the street. That is, until we get to the last episode I want to talk about, The Perfect Pair. In this flashback episode, we see a younger Granny Smith with some of her relatives at Sweet Apple Acres. Here we can see Apple Rose and Goldie Delicious younger as well, two other older relatives of Applejack. And then we also see this completely random stallion we've never seen before or will ever see again. Some fans speculate that this could be Granny Smith's husband, and I agree that theory makes sense. The problem is, we still know literally nothing about this random stallion that showed up for a total of 6 seconds in the entirety of G4, let alone his relatives. So it seems I sadly had to kind of ignore the Smith family reference from Family Appreciation Day. Although, despite such a lack of information, I was actually able to speculate a little bit about Granny Smith's husband's family. So at least they're in the family tree, at least just a little bit. That's better than nothing. Lastly, I just want to say a huge disclaimer, if you couldn't clearly tell by now by everything I just said. About 80% of this family tree is going to be pure speculation. Some things are definitive, some things are an educated guess, but at the end of the day, it's just plain impossible to tell exactly, with 100% certainty, how each and every Apple family member is related, unfortunately. I'm sorry I can't make it more definitive, but on the bright side, this means that the family tree is up to discussion. That the family tree that I created for this video isn't necessarily any more right or wrong than one that you might come up with. And that's kind of cool. So if you have way too much time on your hands like I do, I recommend any diehard MLP fans to try to make up your own version and compare it to mine. I actually had quite a lot of fun piecing it together like a puzzle. A puzzle that I am very proud to finally present. Here it is, folks. The one, the only, ultimate Applejack family tree. So, here it is, at long last. As you can see, there are 5 rows of ponies here. For the most part, I tried to organize these rows by generations. For example, the top row are the greats in relation to Applejack. That's where her great great aunts, great great uncles, great grandparents, and that sort of thing would go. The second row is the grand generation: grandparents, great aunts, and great uncles. The third row is Applejack's aunts and uncles, her parents' generation. Remember, if Bright Mac is an only child, that means none of these aunts and uncles are literally actually Applejack's aunts and uncles. She just calls them that out of simplicity since they are older relatives in the same generation as her parents, similar to how an aunt or uncle would be. Then the row of cousins and siblings, and lastly, any second cousins, nieces, or nephews of Applejack would belong on the bottom row. Another thing to note is that generally, the ponies on the left side are older than the ponies on the right. This helps us know the birth order of siblings. For example, with Applejack siblings, Big Mac is farthest to the left because he's the oldest, then Applejack is next as the second oldest, and finally, Apple Bloom is on the farthest right as the youngest. Now is finally the part of the video where I will explain each section of the family tree and each of its members, and explain my reasoning for why I put every pony in the place that I did. We'll go in order from the top of the family tree to the bottom, taking a look at one individual family unit at a time. First and foremost, we have Applesauce and So-and-So. These two sisters are where the entire family tree all begins. So-and-So is Granny Smith's mother, making her Applejack's great-grandmother, although in the show she is deceased. Applesauce, however, despite her age, is still kicking and is Granny Smith's aunt, making her Applejack's great-great-aunt. In Apple Family Reunion, Granny Smith mentions how Applesauce is actually just a nickname, not her birth name. This is good information to know, as it explains why so many of these ponies have Apple in their name, even the in-laws, who, if they were actually born apples, that would be weird because they would be marrying their relatives. But if Applesauce is just a nickname, then we can safely assume that many other Apple family members probably also have gotten Apple-related nicknames over the years. It's like how they know they have been accepted into the family, which is sweet. Applesauce married Apple Strudel. I chose this because, in the episode Family Appreciation Day, Granny Smith calls Apple Strudel her uncle. And again, if he's her uncle, that means he's Applejack's great-great-uncle, putting him in the same generation as Applesauce. And, well, there aren't really any other old men in that generation to choose from, so Applesauce's husband he shall be. Applesauce must have at least one child, because Granny Smith also has a cousin named Applerose. If Applesauce is Granny Smith's only aunt ever mentioned, then she is the only option to be Applerose's mother, since a cousin is the child of your aunt or uncle. Not really having anywhere else to put Goldie Delicious, I figured I might as well make her Applerose's sister, since she's Granny Smith's only other cousin. Thankfully, the color schemes also match up perfectly. When she was young, Applesauce had a purple mane, which is probably where Applerose gets her purple eyes from. Both Applerose and Goldie Delicious have goldish colored coats that are similar to Apple Strudel's brown coat. And Goldie Delicious also used to have a green mane when she was young, which could have come from Applesauce's green coat. And let's see what Applesauce's sister So-and-So is up to. Well, she married Pokeokes, Granny Smith's father and Applejack's great-grandfather. The birth order of Granny Smith and her brothers is completely speculative, but for some reason it felt right to me to make the brown brother the oldest, the yellow brother the middle child, and Granny Smith the youngest of the three. I don't know, maybe it's because in my own family, my mom has two older brothers, so the boy, girl birth order feels familiar to me. By the way, while we're at Granny Smith, I have to ask, there's no way that's her birth name, right? I know she's technically named after Granny Smith like the apples, but there's no way anyone would name their newborn daughter Granny something, right? Too bad we'll never know for sure. Oh well. In a flashback in Apple Family Reunion, we briefly see this pretty yellow pony with a red mane, who according to the internet is named Candy Twirl, though I have no idea how people know that. Judging by how similar she looks to Granny Smith's brother, you would think they'd be related in some way. But remember that flashback in Family Appreciation Day? Granny Smith doesn't have any sisters, just the two brothers. So I thought it would be kind of funny if she was actually her brother's wife instead. I don't know. I just thought it would be kind of funny that he would just so happen to marry someone who looks almost exactly like him. This would make Candy Twirl Granny Smith's sister-in-law. Since we never see Granny Smith's brothers or Candy Twirl outside of flashbacks, it's safe to assume they are all deceased. Lastly, as I said earlier, we're speculating that this random background stallion from the perfect pair is Granny Smith's husband. I named him Mr. Apple since I assume his name is Apple something, but we don't know Apple what. So I thought it'd be kind of funny if he was just simply Mr. Apple. On Mr. Apple's side of the family, I gave him a sister, Pineapple. In the episode Some Pony to Watch Over Me, Granny Smith goes to visit someone she calls Great Aunt Pineapple. This character is never shown, but in order to be Applejack's great aunt, she has to be a part of this generation. So I thought making her Mr. Apple's sister would be a great way to introduce some of his side of the family. It also makes sense that Granny Smith would want to visit her, if she is her sister-in-law. Now, in speaking of generations, I'm sure you've been wondering why her picture is of a G3 pony. Well, like I said, she's never shown in the show, only mentioned. But I didn't want to leave her picture blank. And actually, when I looked up MLP Pineapple on Google Images, this G3 pony was the first to pop up. And I figured, why not? Many G4 ponies get their names and likeness from G3 ponies anyway. So why should Pineapple be any different? She very well could still have the same color scheme as the G3 pony. And with the hot pink coat and the green mane, it's a close match to Mr. Apple's red mane and green eyes. Also, this G3 pony's full name is Pineapple Paradise, which is such a pretty name, by the way. The last pony in the Grand generation is none other than Grandpere, Applejack's maternal grandfather. Like I said, we don't really care about any of his relatives. This isn't a pear family tree, it's an apple family tree. So let's just move on already. Now we're moving on to the aunt and uncle generation. Goldie Delicious, according to my speculating, has 3 sons, Moseley Orange, Bushel, and Half-Baked Apple. Being the children of her cousin, this would make them Granny Smith's second cousins. What would that make them in relation to Applejack? Basically nothing. But anyway, all 3 of these stallions have very similar color schemes as Goldie Delicious, with their golden coats and green manes. As again, Goldie Delicious had a green mane when she was young. As for Half-Baked Apple, his red mane probably comes from his father, who I assume is either deceased or was never around to begin with. Half-Baked Apple gets his freckles from his mom. Also regarding Half-Baked Apple, in the first episode of the show, one of the relatives that Applejack lists off to Twilight is some pony named Baked Apples, but he is never seen or mentioned again. For the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to assume that he is the same pony as Half-Baked Apple, and that Baked Apples is just a nickname. Canonly, we already know that Moseley Orange marries Mrs. Orange. In the episode The Cutie Mark Chronicles, Applejack tells the story of how she went to stay with her aunt and Uncle Orange in Manhattan for a little while when she was a filly. Of course, Mrs. Orange obviously must have changed her name when she married Moseley Orange, like how Siobhan Swirl changed her name to Mrs. Cake when she married Carrot Cake. I put Apple Dumpling and Gala Appleby in the aunt and uncle generation because something about their mane styles scream middle-aged mom to me. I don't know. And so Bushel married Apple Dumpling and Half-Baked Apple married Gala Appleby. Here we have Apple Rose's speculative daughter, Florina Tart, Granny Smith's other second cousin. Florina's mane style and color kind of remind me of Apple Rose's when she was young, and they just kind of look nice together. I love Florina Tart's name and design, she's so pretty. Granny Smith's oldest brother, who unfortunately doesn't have a name, had 2 daughters with either an unknown or deceased mare, Apple Brown Betty and Apple Leaves. This makes Apple Brown Betty and Apple Leaves Granny Smith's nieces. They looked similar, so it makes sense that they would be sisters. Applejack candidly calls Apple Brown Betty her aunt. so we know she must belong in this generation. And Apple Leaves has 8 kids, so I assume she's much older than Applejack, making her old enough to be in this generation too. In a flashback in Apple Family Reunion, Apple Brown Betty is seen with Apple Split a lot, leading me to speculate him as her husband. I chose Hayseed Turnip Truck as Apple Leaves' husband, and I'll explain more why later. I gave Candy Twirl and Granny Smith's other brother 2 daughters as well, Red Gala and Apple Pumpkin, 2 more nieces of Granny Smith. Funny enough, I made them their daughters for opposite reasons. Red Gala because she looks very different from her parents, and Apple Pumpkin because she looks like a carbon copy of her parents. I don't know. I just thought it was funny that Red Gala is the odd pony out in this family of yellow coat, red maned ponies. Red Gala and Apple Pumpkin are seen together a lot, so I wanted them to be sisters. As everyone knows, Granny Smith had a son named Bright Macintosh, who married Pear Butter, even though the apples and the pears always fought with each other, making them like Romeo and Juliet. They're so cute together. This is further evidence that this random stallion, Mr. Apple, is Granny Smith's husband and Bright Mac's dad, because they have very similar manes, in both style and color. Bright Mac would have gotten his yellow coat from Granny Smith, because when she was young, her mane was blonde. Remember Mr. Apple's sister, Pineapple? I didn't have room to fit her family members in the right spot, so unfortunately I had to put them in this empty spot in the family tree here. I made Apple Cinnamon her son, as he could have gotten his green mane from hers. Like how I speculated Half-Baked Apple and Baked Apples are the same pony, there is someone called Apple Cinnamon Crisp who is mentioned but never seen. I assume that is just Apple Cinnamon's full name. Also, he married Apple Honey. It's now time for the cousins. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Aunt and Uncle Orange don't have any kids. Yeah, I originally wasn't going to give them any, but there were so many ponies and so few places to fit them all, I kinda had no choice. Well, here are some of Applejack's cousins that have similar orangey color schemes as Aunt and Uncle Orange. So, yeah. But wait, think about it. This could actually make a lot of sense. Why is Applejack so close to Brayburn, a random distantly related cousin? Well, like I said, Applejack spent some time with Aunt and Uncle Orange when she was young. While he was never shown on screen, perhaps Brayburn was living there too, and the two met and got to become close friends who still keep in touch to this day. I also made Brayburn the oldest sibling since he obviously doesn't live in Manhattan with his parents anymore, and is old enough to found his own town, Appaloosa. So he's definitely out of the nest. Interestingly enough, this means that he's probably more Big Mac's age than Applejack, and Caramel Apple is probably closer in age to her than him, but they still became good friends anyway, which is interesting. As I mentioned before, there are a ton of random little fillies running around the Apple family reunion, and well, some pony has to be their parents. Apple Brioche is yet another character mentioned but never shown, so why not attribute that name to this random unnamed kid? Might as well, until I realized that some of these fillies actually have names. I have no idea how or where these names came from, and they're probably not canon at all, but oh well. Better than leaving them nameless. So that's how I gave the orange filly the name Apple Squash. These two fillies traveled to the reunion in the same carriage together, making it likely that they are sisters. And they seem awfully close, as they compete in the 7-legged race together. Apple Squash looks like a spitting image of Bushel, so I knew she had to be his daughter. And Apple Broche, of course, gets her red coat and green mane from her mom. Now, why did I make Half-Baked Apple Bab's father, you ask? Well, for one, they have very similar color schemes. Although we never see who Babs arrives with or left the reunion with, we know that some pony there must be her parent, as she's too young to travel there alone. It also explains where she gets her freckles from. And perhaps the best reason, I just thought it was funny that this guy of all ponies, who looks as yeehaw of a country cowboy as anyone could get, actually lives in Manhattan of all places. Now, I know I said earlier that I wasn't going to include any comic stuff. I'm sorry, but I've never read any of the comics. And if I combed through every single one for Apple family members, it would just be too much. But Babs is way too important of a character to ignore the fact that she canonly has a big sister who apparently only appears in the comics. Now, Babs has mentioned in the show that she has a big sis, even though we never saw her or heard her name, which led me to thinking that maybe Apple Cobbler was her sister due to their similar color schemes. But nope, I just couldn't ignore such a blaringly wrong thing in the family tree. I had to make Bab's sister right. Apparently, her sister's name is Sunflower, and I really like her design. I also had to change Babs's mom because I had to find some pony with pink in them. Otherwise, where else would Sunflower get her pink coat from? Hence Gala Appleby. Overall, it's nice to finally see the complete family of Babs. Apparently, some fans have wondered if maybe Aunt and Uncle Orange were actually Babs's parents, since they both live in Manhattan, and even appeared in the background walking around the city once. But then, where would Babs get her freckles from? And it's never been confirmed or denied. Besides, it makes sense if Babs was walking around the city with her Aunt Orange. Since they both live in Manhattan, she's probably much closer to the Oranges than with her other aunts and uncles, and we're probably just spending some aunt niece time together. Next up is Apple Split and Apple Brown Betty's three daughters: Applejack's cousins, Candy Apples, Perfect Pie, and Peachy Sweet. I wanted Candy Apples and Peachy Sweet to be sisters, since they are both green with red manes. I added Perfect Pie to the mix, since her and Candy Apples traveled to the reunion together, along with Apple Split, which would make sense if he was their father. And Perfect Pie looks very similar to Apple Brown Betty, too. I don't know what it is, but something about Perfect Pie's design makes me feel like she's the oldest. Similarly, something about Peachy Sweet's design makes me feel like she's the youngest. Naturally, this puts Candy Apples in the middle as the middle child. Honestly, I didn't know what else to do with Golden Delicious, not to be confused with Goldie Delicious. So he's Perfect Pie's boyfriend now. Deal with it. And now we get to... oh boy. Again, Apple Leaves has 8 kids. Yes, during a conversation with Apple Dumpling, it is canonly confirmed that she does, in fact, have 8, with the youngest being a baby who is never shown named Apple Tart. Well, this can actually be to our advantage, as it gives a spot to put all of the rest of these random fillies, as well as where to put 3 particular mares: Apple Fritter, Lavender Fritter, and Jonagold, who all look exactly the same other than their main colors. Oh, well, this also helps explain why Apple Leaves has so many kids. Because she had 3 at once. That's right, Apple Fritter, Lavender Fritter, and Jonagold look way too similar to not be nearly identical triplets. Exciting, right? Now, I know that earlier I mentioned Hayseed Turnip Truck and Red Delicious were probably not closely related because they reunite as if they hadn't seen each other in a long time. But this actually could also be evidence that they are father and son. For starters, they look very similar. And if Red Delicious is the oldest of the 8, it's safe to assume he's all grown up and out of the house. So it's no wonder they're so excited to see each other at the reunion, even having their own father-son brohoof greeting. Cute. Oh yeah, I guess I should also explain why Hayseed Turnip Truck is Appleleaf's husband like I was going to earlier. Well, for one, they stand next to each other at the reunion. And as every shipper knows, if two characters are standing next to each other, that must mean they're deeply in love, right? Also, like with Red Delicious, Hayseed Turnip Truck helps explain the color scheme of the rest of Appleleaf's children. Many of them have yellow coats, just like their dad, including the triplets. And because I thought it would be funny that this guy has 8 kids, this guy, this guy is the father of 8. Yes, yes, he is. I also knew I wanted Apple Flora and Red Delicious to be closely related somehow, since they look extremely similar. And lastly, there is also even more evidence that Apple Crumble is Jonagold's little sister. Upon arriving at the reunion, Apple Crumble hides behind Jonagold, acting shy. It's clear that these two share a close sisterly bond, like Applejack and Apple Bloom. I wanted Wensley to be Apple Cinnamon's son since they arrive at the reunion together, riding a blimp. At first, I thought that Gala Appleby would be the mother, but then I had to switch Apple Honey with her since, again, I needed some pony with pink in her to be Sunflower's mom, and the options are quite limited when it comes to pink ponies in the Apple family. So, yeah, that sucks. I'm sorry, I really have no explanation as to why Gala Appleby would be traveling with Apple Cinnamon and Wensley instead of Apple Honey. Oh well. At least it makes the color scheme make more sense, since Apple Honey does look very similar to Wensley. Apple Cider here is Wensley's girlfriend. I don't have any explanation as to why she looks so similar to Peachy Sweet, but hey, recolors of background ponies are literally everywhere in MLP, so I don't think it's that weird or far-fetched of an idea that these two completely unrelated ponies are recolors of each other. This is an easy and obvious one. Like how Apple Bumpkin is a spitting image of her parents. Candy Caramel Tooth looks so much like Red Gala, I wonder if she's her clone. That would explain why there is no father in the picture. And I saved the best for last. It's Applejack! Yay! Yeah, nothing much to say here. We already know that Big Mac is the big brother, Apple Bloom the little sister, Sugar Belle her sister-in-law, and Big Sugar her nephew from the future. Nice. And there you have it, folks, the complete ultimate Applejack family tree, explained down to every last detail. I can't believe I have every single one of these ponies' names and faces memorized now. At any rate, thanks to making this video, I've actually come up with some other ideas for unique MLP videos after all. If there's anything about MLP you'd like to see me talk about next, let me know. I also plan to post many other different kinds of videos for other cartoons and video games, so stay tuned for that. Also, make sure to let me know if there are any contradictions or any pony I missed, as I'm sure there are somewhere. And maybe I'll have to make a part 2 fixing them all, who knows. How would you make Applejack's family tree? Who would you have be related to who, and how? Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go do something that doesn't involve staring at ponies for hours on end. Thanks for watching my very long video, and this is Lovebird signing off. Bye!